Somewhere in Britain, there's a high street that hasn't changed since Harold Wilson was Prime Minister, where the butcher still writes the prices in chalk, where the Working Men's Club opens at noon, and the same men who've been coming since 1971 are still in the same seats, where the co-op is still the co-op, not a rebranded convenience chain, not a coffee franchise, the actual co-op with the actual dividend, where the Saturday market sells vegetables grown 10 miles away by someone whose father sold vegetables from the same spot, and the pub at the end of the road has the same landlord it had in 1978 and the same carpet it had in 1964. These places exist, right now, scattered across England, Wales and Scotland, like something the property developers haven't found yet, while the rest of Britain tears itself apart. Rising costs, in collapsing high streets, cities that price out the very people who built them, towns that got turned into commuter dormitories and lost their souls in the process. These places kept going the way they always had, not out of stubbornness, not out of poverty, out of something harder to name and more important to understand, a sense of place so deep it became a form of resistance. And in 2025, as millions of British people stare at their rent bills and their commute times and their phone screens and feel the specific exhaustion of a country that has been accelerating in the wrong direction for 30 years, these towns are starting to look less like the past and more like a very serious question about the future. Today, we're counting down the 10 UK towns that still feel completely, defiantly stuck in the 1960s. And by the end, well, you might be wondering why the rest of Britain was in such a hurry to leave them behind. Stay with us until number 1, because that town story is unlike anything else on this island. And if you want more cinematic deep dives into the hidden corners of Britain that most people drive straight past, hit subscribe right now. Let's go. These aren't failing towns. These aren't places that got left behind through misfortune. These are communities that held on to something specific and real while the rest of the country was busy letting it go. Here are the 10 UK towns that still feel like they're completely stuck in the 1960s, counted down from 10 to 1. Number 10, Todmorden, West Yorkshire. Number 10, Todmorden, the Pennine Mill town that the M62 bypassed and the 21st century hasn't quite reached. One Todmorden sits in the narrow Calder Valley, pinched between steep wooded hillsides, where the cotton mills and the chapels were built so close together you could hear the looms and the hymns at the same time. The town grew from the Industrial Revolution, the way every mill town in this valley grew. Fast, dense, uncompromising, and it carries that density still. The stone is dark. The streets are steep. The terraces run up the hillsides at angles that seem to defy sensible planning. And yet Todmorden in 2025 has something remarkable. A community so tightly woven, it functions like communities functioned before the internet, before out-of-town retail, before the slow dissolution of working-class civic life that turned most of these valleys into places people slept rather than places people lived. At the town hall, an absurdly grand piece of Victorian civic ambition for a town this size, still anchors the market square the way it always has. The market itself still trades on the days it has always traded. The pubs still have regulars who are genuinely regular. An incredible edible Todmorden, the guerrilla food growing movement that started here and spread around the world, grew out of exactly this soil. A town that still believed in collective action, in neighbour feeding neighbour, in the radical idea that community is something you do rather than something you consume. Todmorden didn't get stuck in the 60s. It just never agreed that leaving them was progress. Number 9, Bewdley, Worcestershire. Number 9, Bewdley, at the Severn Valley town that the dual carriageway missed, and that has spent every decade since looking quietly relieved about it. Bewdley is so well preserved that English Heritage has listed much of its town centre as a conservation area of national importance. The Georgian and earlier buildings along Lode Street are extraordinary, not restored and roped off, but lived in, traded from, inhabited, with the casual confidence of a town that has never had to reinvent itself. But the quality that makes Bewdley feel specifically frozen in the 60s isn't its Georgian bones. It's the overlay, the independent shops that have occupied the same premises for decades. The Bewdley Museum, housed in the old shambles, the covered market where local craftsmen worked for 3 centuries. At the steam railway that runs from Kidderminster through Bewdley and up to Bridgnorth, operated by volunteers with the kind of devotion to a particular idea of England that you either completely understand or completely can't. The River Severn at Bewdley does something particular in the late afternoon. The light comes flat and golden off the water. The old bridge takes it full in the face, and the town behind it looks like a place assembled specifically to make you feel that time is not, after all, entirely linear. That feeling is the thing. And in Bewdley, unlike in so many places that have tried to manufacture it, the feeling is real. Number 8. Alston, Cumbria. Number 8. Alston, the highest market town in England, and quite possibly the most stubbornly, magnificently out of step with contemporary Britain. Alston sits at over 1,000 feet on the South Tyne in the North Pennines, in a landscape so open and so unforgiving in winter that it shaped the people who settled it into something specific and unsentimental. The town grew from lead mining and hill farming, and those industries left their mark in the grey stone buildings, the narrow cobbled main street that tumbles steeply down from the market cross, and a collective character that has never particularly cared what the rest of the country thinks of it. Getting to Alston is the first statement it makes about itself. There is no easy way. The roads are narrow, the passes are severe in bad weather, and the distance from the nearest motorway junction is a kind of commentary. And arriving, stepping out of the car, into thin, cold, extraordinarily clean air, looking at a main street that could have been lifted wholesale from a 1962 documentary about English market towns, is a second, stronger statement. The South Tynedale Railway, the narrowest gauge railway in England, runs from here. The local pubs are serious about their function. The market cross still marks the spot where markets have been held since Alston received its charter in the 13th century, and the market still happens. Alston is the kind of place that requires a particular personality to live in and thrives on the people that personality selects. The result is a community with more coherence and more genuine character than towns 20 times its size. The altitude keeps the tourists manageable, and the attitude keeps the developers at bay. Both are, from Alston's perspective, entirely satisfactory. Number 7. Blaenavon. South Wales number 7. Blaenavon, the ironworks town on the edge of the Brecon Beacons, where the Industrial Revolution began, and where something of its human texture has never quite ended. Blaenavon is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, which might make it sound polished and curated and safe for tourists. It is not those things. It is raw and remarkable and carries the specific weight of a place where enormous historical forces touched down on an actual community and changed what it meant to be alive and working in Britain. The Big Pit National Coal Museum is here, one of the best industrial museums in Europe, operated by people whose fathers and grandfathers worked the colliery, where the underground guides are retired miners who know every heading and every fatality because they knew the men. The Blaenavon Ironworks, where the technologies that built the industrial world were developed and tested, stand nearby. But step away from the heritage sites and into the residential streets of Blaenavon. The terraced roads, the chapels, the Working Men's Institute, and the 60's feel arrives with full force. This is a town where the community structures of the post-war decades are still recognizable, where the social architecture built around collective labor, the institute, the welfare hall, the choir, hasn't been entirely demolished, even when the industry that created it has. Blaenavon feels like a place still living with its own history in real time, not performing it, living it. And that quality of genuine, unmediated connection between a community and the story that made it is rarer in Britain than anything on the UNESCO list. Number 6. Alnwick, Northumberland. Number 6. Alnwick, the Northumberland market town, where the castle has been watching over the same streets for 900 years, and the streets have been perfectly happy with the arrangement. Alnwick, pronounced Annick, and the town will know immediately that you're not from here if you don't, is the kind of market town that England used to make regularly and has almost entirely stopped making. The The castle at one end, the market square in the middle, the independent shops, the pubs, the butcher and the baker operating as they have operated for as long as anyone can remember. The whole composition has a rightness to it that feels less designed than settled, the way a landscape settles into itself over centuries. What makes Alnwick feel specifically mid-century isn't any single building or business. It's the social scale. This is a town where you cannot walk from one end of the high street to the other without stopping to talk, where the news travels faster through human conversation than through any app, where the annual Shrove Tuesday football match, an ancient, chaotic, town-wide game with no fixed rules and unlimited participants, still happens every year, because it has always happened, and Alnwick does not need a reason beyond that. Barter Books, the celebrated second-hand bookshop housed in the old Victorian railway station, draws visitors from across the country and beyond. But Alnwick holds its identity too firmly to be remade by its own tourist attraction. The town contains the bookshop. The bookshop does not contain the town. If this video is already making you want to cancel the weekend plans, fill up the tank, and just drive north. You're not alone. Hit the like button right now. It genuinely helps this video reach more people who are ready to rediscover this country. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. We find the Britain most travel guides completely miss. 5 more towns to go. The best ones are still ahead. Number 5. Hay-on-Wye, Powys, Wales. Number 5. Hay-on-Wye, the border town that reinvented itself around books 40 years ago and accidentally preserved everything else in the process. When Richard Booth declared Hay-on-Wye an independent kingdom in 1977 and named himself king, and when the second-hand bookshops he championed began multiplying across the town's old buildings until Hay had more bookshops per square foot than anywhere on earth, the world came to pay attention. The literary festival followed, and the international reputation followed. What didn't follow was the transformation that fame usually brings. Hay-on-Wye remains, beneath its bibliophile celebrity, a small Welsh border town where the River Wye marks the boundary between England and Wales, and the community on both sides of that boundary lives at the pace dictated by the landscape and the seasons rather than by demand or aspiration. The market town beneath the bookshops is still a market town. The castle ruins at the centre of everything are genuinely ruined, not restored, not floodlit, not monetised beyond a small honesty box on the gate. The streets are narrow and uneven, and the buildings lean into each other with the comfortable familiarity of old neighbours. There's a particular quality to a grey Welsh morning in Hay-on-Wye, the mist off the river, but the hills going soft in the distance, the smell of old paper drifting from a dozen open doorways that places you somewhere outside the ordinary progression of time. The books in every shop span centuries. The town around them spans centuries too. And standing in the middle of it, you understand that Hay's greatest achievement isn't the festival or the fame. It's the survival, intact and unhurried, of a way of being in a place that modern Britain keeps trying to make impossible. Number 4. Whitby, North Yorkshire. Number 4. Whitby, the North Sea port that Dracula made famous, that the jet trade made prosperous, and that the 21st century has failed, despite considerable effort, to make it unrecognisable. Whitby is not undiscovered. Whitby is not quiet. And on a summer weekend, the narrow streets above the harbour are thick with visitors, and the fish and chip shops operate at a tempo that would have been inconceivable in 1965. All of that is true, and none of it is the point, because Whitby has something that visitor numbers cannot dissolve. A physical structure so dramatic and so particular that it imposes itself on everything that happens within it. The ruined abbey on the cliff, the 199 steps, the old town below with its yards, the narrow alleyways called yards that run between the buildings like secret passages, unchanged in their layout since medieval times. The harbour, where the fishing boats still come in and the fish market still functions, and the catch still goes directly to the shops and restaurants on the quayside. What the Whitby that exists when the weekend visitors go home, the Whitby of the fishing families, the boat builders, the people who have lived in these streets for generations and who navigate the yards by muscle memory, is the Whitby that time forgot. The Gothic atmosphere that attracted Bram Stoker and that still draws the twice-yearly Goth weekend is only the most visible expression of a deeper, stranger quality, the sense of a town that exists at the edge of things, looking out at something enormous, entirely comfortable with its own isolation. Whitby was always a world unto itself. It still is. The sea makes sure of that. Number 3. Ironbridge, Shropshire. Number 3. Ironbridge, the Shropshire Gorge town where the modern world was born and where the modern world has never quite felt at home since. At the Iron Bridge itself, the first cast iron bridge in the world, built in 1779, spanning the River Severn in a single elegant arc, is one of the most significant structures ever made by human hands. It changed what was possible. It inaugurated an age. It is, in its quiet, permanent way, the reason the world you live in exists. And it is still there, exactly where it has always been, unchanged. The town that grew around it, and the cluster of communities in the Ironbridge Gorge that the World Heritage designation encompasses, carries the same quality of unchanged permanence. The terraced workers' cottages run up the gorge's steep sides. The old ironmasters' houses line the riverside. The museums that now occupy the historic sites, the Coalbrookdale furnace where Abraham Darby first smelted iron with coke, and the Blists Hill Victorian town, where an entire living community has been reassembled, are extraordinary. But they are surrounded by a living community that needs no reconstruction. Ironbridge. In the early morning, before the visitors arrive, when the mist is sitting in the gorge and the river is running brown and full and the bridge is catching the first light above it. This is a place that makes you feel the full, vertiginous depth of time. Not in a heavy or oppressive way, in the way that looking at something genuinely old and genuinely real always does, with a kind of grateful astonishment that it's still there. The 60s quality here isn't nostalgic, it's structural. This is a town that has never needed to perform its own history because its history has never stopped being present. Number 2. Hebden Bridge. Or West Yorkshire, number 2, Hebden Bridge, the Calder Valley mill town that the counterculture found in the 1970s, and that somehow remained through everything, completely and specifically itself. Hebden Bridge should not work. By any conventional logic, a small former textile town in a steep Yorkshire valley with difficult access, severe winters, and an economy that lost its industrial base decades ago, should have followed the trajectory of every other post-industrial northern town. It did not. What happened instead is one of the stranger and more instructive stories in 20th century British social history. When the mills closed and the houses emptied, the low property prices attracted artists, writers, musicians, and what the Yorkshire press of the 1970s called, with characteristic understatement, alternative types. They arrived, they stayed, they had children, those children stayed. The community that resulted, a layering of old mill-town working-class culture and incoming creative alternative energy, produced something with more genuine character than almost anywhere in England. The town today is celebrated for its bookshops, its art scene, its LGBTQ+ community, its independent businesses, its extraordinarily high density of interesting people per square mile. But beneath all of that, the bones of the original mill town are intact. The vernacular stone architecture, the valley topography that makes everything slightly vertiginous, the sense that the community knows itself, really knows itself, in the way that only communities of a certain scale, in a certain kind of place, can manage. Hebden Bridge is stuck in the 60s, not architecturally, but spiritually. In the specific 60s spirit of believing that collective life, lived with intention and creativity and genuine solidarity, was worth more than individual convenience. That idea went out of fashion everywhere else. In Hebden Bridge, they're still testing it. Number 1. Wirksworth, Derbyshire. Number 1. Wirksworth. The town that most people have never heard of. The town that might be the most quietly extraordinary community left in England. In the limestone uplands of the Derbyshire Dales, 12 miles south of Matlock, a town of fewer than 6,000 people has been doing something that the rest of Britain has largely forgotten how to do. It has been being a community, deliberately, attentively, generation after generation, but without fanfare and without anyone outside the Peak District particularly noticing. Wirksworth is old, seriously old. There are records of a church here from the 7th century, and the sense of deep time in the landscape around it, in the dry stone walls and the ancient field systems, and the limestone quarrying that has shaped this land for centuries, is palpable, even on a brief visit. The town itself is a maze of ginnels, narrow alleyways, and yards and passages that open unexpectedly into small squares, a physical layout that resists being rushed through and rewards being walked slowly. The marketplace at the centre of town has been a marketplace since time before records. It still is. The independent shops around it, the proper ones, the ones that have been there for decades, are still trading. But the community that animates them is still the community that built them. In the 1970s, Wirksworth was in serious decline. The lead mining that had sustained it for a millennium was long gone. The textile industries had contracted. A project was initiated, one of the earliest community regeneration initiatives in the country, that brought artists and craftspeople a due residence in, not to gentrify, but to participate. The project worked, and the reason it worked, where so many others have failed, is that Wirksworth already had something to preserve. Not just buildings, but a social fabric, a way of knowing and looking after one another that was worth the effort. Walk through Wirksworth on a weekday morning, the cafe, where 3 different conversations are happening across tables and nobody's looking at a laptop. At the gallery in the old building, where local artists show work that is genuinely local, made from this place, about this place, for the people who live here as much as for any visitor. The Wirksworth Festival, which has been running for decades and which draws the whole community into something that feels less like an event and more like a collective statement of continued existence. This is what the 60s, the best of the 60s, the part that wasn't fashion or politics but genuine communal aspiration, actually looked like in practice. Not idealism, practice. The daily, unglamorous, irreplaceable work of being in a place together. Britain spent the last 40 years being told that individualism was liberation and that community was a consolation prize for people who hadn't made it. The towns on this list are the quiet, persistent, a daily proof that the opposite is true. Wirksworth didn't get the memo, or it read it, weighed it carefully, and put it in the recycling. Across Britain, something is beginning to shift. After a generation defined by the promise that growth and mobility and the freedom to go anywhere would make people happy. After the hollowing out of high streets and the death of the local pub and the slow disappearance of the kind of neighbour who knew your name without having to check their phone. People are looking differently at the places that didn't change. The towns on this list are not perfect. They have their struggles, their losses, their absences. Some of them are fighting for survival. Some of them are navigating the painful arithmetic of post-industrial economies with no easy answers. But they have something that the rest of Britain sold off in the name of efficiency, something that cannot be rebuilt overnight, cannot be conjured by a regeneration fund or a heritage grant, cannot be installed like infrastructure. A sense of place, a knowledge of neighbours, a daily life calibrated to human scale rather than economic scale. The specific, unhurried, irreplaceable experience of living somewhere that knows what it is. The 1960s weren't a golden age. They had their darkness, their injustice, their limitations. But at the level of community life, at the level of the street and the market square, and the working men's club and the chapel and the corner shop, they represented something that Britain had been building for centuries and has been dismantling for decades. These 10 towns are still building it, still tending it, still passing it on. The rest of the country is only now beginning to understand what it walked away from. If this video resonated with you, hit that like button. It helps us reach more people who are ready to look at Britain differently. Drop a comment below. Which of these towns have you visited? Which one are you going to? Are you a Yorkshire person who already knew Hebden Bridge and Todmorden are something else entirely? Or are you booking a drive to Wirksworth this weekend? Subscribe if you haven't. Turn on the bell. We cover the Britain that the travel industry doesn't know what to do with and the history books haven't caught up to yet. This country is stranger and deeper and more alive than anyone is giving it credit for, and we are just getting started.